Hi everyone, thank you all for having me today. I think my name's Jessen, and I probably have the least technical talk out of everyone today. I really appreciate all the presentations. What I'm here to talk about today is your sandboxes and anonymizing your data in your sandbox environments. So a little bit about me. My name's Jessen. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering at OwnBackup. I don't know if any of you have heard of OwnBackup, but we are a backup and recovery third-party tool for Salesforce.
We use you.
Yeah? Any other customers of OwnBackup? Awesome. Thank you, guys. A little bit about my background. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 5 years now. Before OwnBackup, I actually did a lot of front-end development, so I used a third-party tool called, I worked for Squid. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. I did a lot of development work through Squid. Before Salesforce, I worked on satellites. So my degree is in electrical engineering, and I also was a developer for the government for about 10 years. And if both of these topics are not of interest to you, you don't want to talk to me about Salesforce, space, I'm also really into surfing and snowboarding. So other topics, if you guys want to talk about that later. But what I am here to talk about is sandboxes. So sandboxes are a critical part of your whole Salesforce ecosystem. So who here is developing in their sandbox environments? Is there anyone developing straight into production? Right. And so the reason you have sandboxes is so that you don't mess with production data. And sandboxes, they're used for developing new features and functionalities, testing them out, and also for training new admins and developers. But in a study by Cluster HQ, they discovered that 43% of app developers are spending between 10 to 25% of their time debugging production errors, which means that almost half of developers out there, you're spending your time reworking pushed code rather than developing new features and functionalities. And I'm guessing that's kind of what you guys are trying to avoid by using your sandbox environments. Ideally, you're pushing good tested code and it's all working. So what are the challenges when it comes to sandboxes? So you have 4 different types of sandboxes. You're probably working across a variety of different ones, but you have a full sandbox that's a full copy of all of your production data. It is expensive to buy multiple full sandboxes. So generally you have 0 or maybe 1 if you need additional. It's a good 20 to 30% of your Salesforce license cost. Then you have partial sandboxes. So partial sandboxes, they basically take a copy of your data from production, but they're the first 10,000 records of every single object, which means you're going to end up with broken relationships. And that also means it's harder to test on that set of data. And then finally, you have developer pros, developer sandboxes. Those have all of your same configurations from Salesforce. It has all of your metadata, but it doesn't have any data. And another thing to think about nowadays is regulations. So if any of you guys work in a regulated company, you hold PII, PHI information, this information has to be protected. And that also applies to your sandbox environments. And I don't know if you are hearing about any of these keywords nowadays. Who here knows what CCPA is? Right, and so that's a big buzzword nowadays. It's very similar to GDPR. What it allows you to do as a California consumer is you own the right to your data, which means if you are a customer of another company and you tell them to remove your information, forget your information, they have to remove all of your information across all of their data. So that means their sandboxes. You can't accidentally hold their information in any of these environments. So all of these data regulations, they're coming up into play right now. I know California is the first one, but I do anticipate there's probably going to be other states that are going to be following this as well. And so the impacts are development teams, you're working less effectively, you're reworking that pushed code. Full sandboxes, they're not getting refreshed because every time you refresh them, you have to reconfigure the data. And then that also means your development and testing environments aren't in sync, which ultimately bugs and user mistakes are introduced into your production. And one of the customers that we were working with had exactly this situation. So when they started with Salesforce, they had their full sandbox. They took their full sandbox and then they went and they exported all of their data, masked it, just manually through Excel files, imported it back into Salesforce, so they anonymized all of their data. And this process took them 2 months. And as a result of that, they were too scared, never wanted to refresh their sandbox. 3 years later, it's just a completely old instance and not a great testing environment. So what are your options for getting data, anonymized data, into your sandboxes? One, you can completely skip it. Not something I recommend. And then you can manually create and seed the data. This is a manual process. Once again, it involves taking CSV files of all of the data that you need, manually masking it using a tool maybe like Macaru to just have test data in there, and then every time you refresh a sandbox, you're going to have to do this process. Another part is you could use development resources to help develop test scripts that upon refreshes, it'll automatically populate and seed with anonymized data. And then lastly, I'm sure none of you guys are surprised, but OwnBackup is a third-party tool that allows you to seed your sandboxes and also mask that data. So it is something to consider if you are working in your sandbox environment, you need good test data. We essentially allow you to push a subset of data from your production environment, mask it, and then push it into those developer pro sandboxes so you have a representative test set of data in those environments. And that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. We are raffling off the AirPods, so you guys should have all gotten your raffle tickets. You can just ignore this. We will pick the winner through the raffle, and we will mail you guys the AirPods.